أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قالوا يا أيها العزيز إن له أبا شيخا كبيرا فخذ أحدنا مكانه إنا نراك من المحسنين. قال معاذ الله أن نأخذ إلا من وجدنا متاعنا عنده إنا إذا لظالمون. فلما استيئسوا منه خلصوا نجيا. قال كبيرهم ألم تعلموا أن أباكم قد أخذ عليكم موثقا من الله ومن قبل ما فرطتم في يوسف فلن أبرح الأرض حتى يأذن لي أبي أو يحكم الله لي وهو خير الحاكمين. ارجعوا إلى أبيكم فقولوا يا أبانا إن ابنك سرق وما شهدنا إلا بما علمنا وما كنا للغيب حافظين. واسأل القرية التي كنا فيها والعير التي أقبلنا فيها وإنا لصادقون. قال بل سولت لكم أنفسكم أمرا فصبر جميل عسى الله أن يأتيني بهم جميعا إنه هو العليم الحكيم. وتولى عنهم وقال يا أسفا على يوسف وابيضت عيناه من الحزن فهو كظيم. صدق الله العظيم. My dear respected brothers and sisters in Islam, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome back to another weekly Surah Halaqah, where we continue the Tafsir of Surah Yusuf. In the week before last, we discussed the fact that when Benjamin had been caught, when the cup or the bowl had been taken out from his luggage, and therefore the evidence became apparent in front of the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam and also Yusuf alayhi salam himself, that the bowl had now come out from the mata' and the luggage of Benjamin, his brother. Then they imposed the punishment that was mentioned by the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam, that now Benjamin would be detained, he would be put under house arrest. But the fact that the evidence was so damning, and it was completely in front of them, out of shame, they remarked and they said, قالوا إن يسرق فقد سرق أخ له من قبل. That if this one stole, right, referring to Binyamin not even as their brother, that if our brother stole, but rather if this one stole, then he also has a real brother that stole before him. And they were alluding to the fact that Yusuf alayhi salam previously had been accused of stealing, and although it was a completely false story, this is something that they chose to brought up at this moment, and they did not know that Yusuf alayhi salam was standing right in front of them. And therefore Yusuf alayhi salam, upon listening to their accusation, he did not comment, he did not remark, or he did not change his expression. He did not let them know that he had heard what they had said and he knew that they were lying, but rather he just kept it to himself. فَأَصَرَّهَا يُوسُفُ فِي نَفْسِهِ. He concealed it within himself. He completely kept his reaction as neutral, but at the same time, وَلَمْ يُبْدِهَا لَهُمْ. He didn't expose it before them, but at the same time he was affected by the accusation that they were making towards him, because They knew and he knew that the accusation against Sayyidina Yusuf alayhi salam was something that was completely cleared up before. قال أنتم شر مكانا, and therefore he says that you're in a worse place, right? First and foremost, you know that I have been acquitted. I have been completely I've been completely exonerated from that which I was accused of, and yet you still choose to accuse me, meaning that it wasn't enough for you to have me expelled and taken away from my father, have me sold into slavery, have me, completely gotten rid of, and done so much horrible things to me. You still hold hatred in your hearts towards me, and you are still going to accuse me of something that I was completely exonerated of. So قال أنتم شر مكانا, you're in a worse place than I thought you were. والله أعلم بما تصفون, don't worry about this. Allah knows best what you are talking about. So ulama and scholars, they say that قال أنتم شر مكانا, this particular sentence is something that Yusuf alayhi salam said within his own heart. He did not express it out loud, but he said this last sentence, والله أعلم بما تصفون, that Allah knows best of what you are alleging. This is something that he told them directly. So he keeps his speech as neutral as possible so that they don't get an idea that in fact, in reality, he is Yusuf alayhi salam, the same brother that they had conspired against. And at the same time, he leaves his case before Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Moving on, when it becomes apparent, when it becomes completely clear that the brothers are now powerless, they are now powerless to basically get Binyamin released and to have him sent back home, they turn towards different methods. They now try to appeal to Yusuf alayhi salam, appeal to his generosity by saying, قالوا يا أيها العزيز إن له أبا شيخا كبيرا فخذ أحدنا مكانه. That, oh Aziz, this young man, Binyamin, he has a father who is a very old person. إن له أبا شيخا كبيرا. He has a very elderly father, and for him to be separated from his father, this will cause his elderly father immense grief. So in his place, why don't you take one of us? Right? So they began to bargain with Yusuf alayhi salam so that they could end up fulfilling their pledge to their father and take Binyamin back with them. Inna naraka min al-muhsinin, we see you as a very generous person, right? Meaning that previously Yusuf alayhi salam had treated them with a lot of generosity. He had returned their goods back. He had even, said that he would give an extra camel load if they brought Binyamin. And when they did, he extended again his generosity to them. So, inna naraka min al-muhsinin, that we see you as a very generous person. We see within you the traits of excellency and generosity. So Yusuf alayhi salam responds to their request and he says, قَالَ مَعَاذَ اللَّهِ, absolutely not. Right? According to the laws of our land, we cannot أَن نَأْخُذَ إِلَّا مَنْ وَجَدْنَا مَتَاعَنَا عِنْدَهُ. It's not possible for us to just detain whoever we wish. Right? If we do the opposite and we detain someone that was not, that was not accused of stealing, that was not the guilty party, then our own people will riot against us and they will rebel against us to say that we are falsely detaining people that are innocent. So, أَن نَأْخُذَ إِلَّا مَنْ وَجَدْنَا مَتَاعَنَا عِنْدَهُ, this is not possible for us. And this was also cemented by the fact that he had gotten them to agree, he had gotten them to admit beforehand the punishment for the crime according to their Sharia. It was asked of them that what is قالوا فما جزاؤه إن كنتم فاعلين, that what is the punishment for the person if the person is actually caught. And they answered themselves by saying قالوا جزاؤه من وجد في رحله فهو جزاؤه, that person who is found to have stolen and the goods are within their property, then they themselves will become the slave and they will be detained by the person they had stolen from. So this left no more room for the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam to further push their argument, because not only was the evidence right in front of their eyes, but also they had themselves declared the punishment, and therefore they were caught and tied by their own words. Inna idha ladhalimun. Yusuf alayhi salam is saying that if we were to do that, then we would be considered from amongst the wrongdoers, amongst the oppressors. فَلَمَّا اسْتَيْأَسُوا مِنْهُ خَلَصُوا نَجِيًّا. So in the ayah number 80, we see that when the brothers completely lost hope in the fact that they could, get Benjamin released and they could take him back with them to Canaan, خَلَصُوا نَجِيًّا. So they privately went to the side and had a conversation, right? Over here, this is a secret conversation that takes place amongst themselves, and they are, planning out what to do, what steps to take next. So قال كبيرهم ألم تعلموا أن أباكم قد أخذ عليكم موثقا من الله ومن قبل ما فرطتم في يوسف. So over here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that the oldest or the eldest brother from amongst them. Now, with regards to who this person actually was, there are differing opinions amongst the scholars. There are some scholars that say that it was Judah, who previously, when the brothers wanted to kill Yusuf alayhi salam, he was the one that stopped them from doing so and suggested an alternate method. And other scholars, they mentioned that it was Rubil, who was their eldest brother, who previously had helped Yusuf alayhi salam. And the third opinion is that it was Sham'un. But from what I can tell is that the opinion regarding Judah, this seems to be the strongest. And scholars say that although Yehuda was not the oldest in age, he was definitely the eldest in wisdom and knowledge. And therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala refers to him in this manner by saying that the oldest one of them, he said, أَلَمْ تَعْلَمُوا أَنَّ أَبَاكُمْ قَدْ أَخَذَ عَلَيْكُمْ مَوْثِقًا مِّنَ اللَّهِ. Don't you remember that before coming here, your father took a promise from you. Your father took a pledge from you in the name of Allah that you would bring back Binyamin. And on top of that, the last time he took a pledge from you in a similar manner about Yusuf, وَمِن قَبْلُ مَا فَرَّطْتُمْ فِي Yusuf, you defaulted about that as well. So what do you think is going to happen right now? So he says that this is a completely impossible situation. There's no way that I can show my face anymore. فَلَنْ أَبْرَحَ الْأَرْضَ حَتَّى يَأْذَنَ لِي أَبِي أَوْ يَحْكُمَ اللَّهُ لِي. So I shall, stay back here. I'm going to stay in Egypt. I'm not going to go back home because there's no way that I can show my face to my father after giving him two different, promises to return his sons back to him and defaulting on both. So until my father tells me that it's okay to come home, or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sends some sort of revelation and wahi regarding my situation, that I should return or I should be punished or whatever the case is, then only will I take some sort of action, will I come home, or I will follow whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals about me. وَهُوَ خَيْرُ الْحَاكِمِينَ. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the best of judges. So if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decides to pronounce judgment in my favor, then this is something that will benefit me, and therefore I'll be able to return. And I believe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be the best of judges. And then he said that ارجعوا إلى أبيكم فقولوا يا أبانا إن ابنك سرق وما شهدنا إلا بما علمنا وما كنا للغيب حافظين. Go back to your father. Go back to your father and say that, oh, our father, your son has committed theft, your son has stolen. وَمَا شَهِدْنَا إِلَّا بِمَا عَلِمْنَا وَمَا كُنَّا لِلْغَيْبِ حَافِظِينَ. And we are not testifying to, towards something. We're not testifying about something except that which we, that which we have knowledge regarding, right? This is not some, hearsay that we are telling you about, but rather this is actual factual knowledge that we have seen with our own eyes. We have seen it transpire in front of us. The evidence was presented to us So this is something that was completely, not our fault. It was something that happened. It was beyond our control. وَمَا كُنَّا لِلْغَيْبِ حَافِظِينَ refers to the fact that this is an event that transpired above and beyond our control, meaning that the pledge that we gave to you, which you took from us in the name of Allah, we pledged that we would return him back according to the best of our ability. We are not, in charge. We can't control what we don't see and what we don't hear. So this is one meaning of this. وَمَا كُنَّا لِلْغَيْبِ حَافِظِينَ. The other meaning could be that we tried our best to keep Binyamin out of trouble, and we tried, to stop him, to block him from doing something that would land him in trouble. But at there was some point in time where he slipped up, some point in time where we were not vigilant enough, and he committed this act of stealing, and therefore this is the punishment that he is now suffering. This is completely out of our hands. And if you don't believe us, right, because there was past precedent for Yaqub alayhi salam not to believe them, therefore he tells them, the oldest brother is telling his brothers that go and tell, if our father says that he doesn't believe us, وَاسْأَلِ الْقَرْيَةَ الَّتِي كُنَّا فِيهَا وَالْعِيرَ الَّتِي أَقْبَلْنَا فِيهَا وَإِنَّا لَصَادِقُونَ. If you don't believe us, then ask the people of Egypt. We were just in Egypt. Ask the people of Egypt what transpired, what happened. Did we just make this up on our own, or did Binyamin actually steal and the bowl was discovered in his luggage? And also you can ask, if you can't go all the way back to Egypt to inquire, you can ask the caravan that we were traveling with. This caravan has now traveled back with us to Canaan, and you will, when you talk to them, you'll discover that we are speaking the truth. وَإِنَّا لَصَادِقُونَ. So this is the plan that they come up with, and then they return home in this state. And when they relate to Yusuf, Yaqub alayhi salam, as to what happened with Binyamin, immediately we see that his response is different. He says, قَالَ بَلْ سَوَّلَتْ لَكُمْ أَنفُسُكُمْ أَمْرًا. Right? He doesn't believe them. He says that this is something that you are just making up. Right? This is something that your inner desires have just, seduced you again. And this is something that I'm not going to believe you with regards to فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ, but rather in this case I'm going to have patience. I'm going to exercise patience, and this is the best thing that I can do. And this is the exact same response that he gave when they came with the false news regarding Yusuf alayhi salam. They came with the shirt that was doused in sheep's blood to say that Yusuf alayhi salam had been eaten by a wolf. Similarly, Yaqub alayhi salam had said فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ at that time. He didn't believe them, but rather he chose to have patience in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But over here, in this case, we see that something is different, right? He says, after this, he says, عَسَى اللَّهُ أَن يَأْتِيَنِي بِهِمْ جَمِيعًا. We look at the amazing resilience, the amazing iman and faith and tawakkul of Yaqub alayhi salam, that he does not lose hope, but rather he puts his trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he understanding the nature of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ways of doing things in the creation, he understands that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not unnecessarily prolong this sadness, unnecessarily, and unjustly take everything away from him, but rather that this was some sort of elaborate plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And thus he says, عَسَى اللَّهُ أَن يَأْتِيَنِي بِهِمْ جَمِيعًا. Perhaps it is that because of the way that things happen this time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will have mercy upon me, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will carve out a plan in which all three of them are brought back. All three of them are united. All three of them are back home. إِنَّهُ هُوَ الْعَلِيمُ الْحَكِيمُ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the all-knowing, and He is the all-wise. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the knowledge to know when to do things. Allah has the knowledge of how to do things, and Allah has the wisdom to know when to do it. So innahu huwal alimul hakim. And the last, but at the same time, while his tawakkul in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was on that level, Yaqub alayhi salam was still a person who was a human being, and he was prone to emotions. He was prone to he's still bound by the human emotions that a person experiences. So the sadness of this separation still caught up to him, and he turns away from them. وتولى عنهم وقال يا أسف على يوسف وابيضت عيناه من الحزن فهو كظيم. And he basically decides to end this conversation with his sons, and he turns away from them, and he complains of his grief, and he says, "Ya asafa ala Yusuf, how sad, you know, oh my Yusuf." Basically, a person, when they're remembering out of sadness someone that they have lost, like, oh my Yusuf, right? So a question here arises, is that Binyamin is the person that was lost this time, not Yusuf. Yusuf alayhi salam was, was separated from his father over 40 years ago. So how is it that instead of exclaiming, or instead of, making a statement about Binyamin, he says, "Oh my Yusuf," right? So the scholars, they explain that the reason for this is that when a person has a tragedy occur for the same time, one tragedy can lead to the re-triggering of the previous tragedy, right? Especially when the person hasn't gotten over a certain tragedy, and then a second tragedy happens, the pain of the first tragedy always comes back most of the time. And this is exactly what happened in the case of Yaqub alayhi salam. It didn't mean that he didn't, love Binyamin, or he didn't, he wasn't sad over the loss of Binyamin, but rather it was that he had so much sorrow that was stored inside, something that he couldn't share with his family, something that he couldn't share with his children, with his sons, but rather the grief that he was holding inside. And that's why we see that, subhanallah, we see that the expression of this sadness takes a physical toll on his body. وَابْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ, that his eyes turned white out of grief, meaning that he achieves, he either completely becomes blind, or his eyesight becomes very, very weak, right? وَابْيَضَّتْ عَيْنَاهُ, and this is out of the sadness that he was experiencing, out of the tears that he was shedding. There's so much of grief and sorrow that was stored inside of him, and that is why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ, and he was suppressing his anger at that time. Over here, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not use the letter waw to say وَهُوَ كَظِيمٌ, that while he was suppressing his anger, but rather Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the letter fa over here. The letter fa denotes that this is something that was al-fa'ul is-sabab, right? The reason why his eyes became white, the reason why he lost his eyesight, was because of the anger, or because of the sadness that he was storing inside of himself, right? And this is something that, subhanallah, sometimes it happens. Sometimes it happens to people when they're experiencing, a great tragedy in their life. This is something that happens, that physically takes a toll on people. Sometimes people will stop talking. Sometimes they'll completely become withdrawn. Sometimes people will go into depression and sadness. And this is basically what is occurring with Sayyidina Yaqub alayhi salam, because not only had he lost Yusuf, he now lost, two of his other beloved sons. And for him, this was something that was too much, right? His grief had now been compounded from one tragedy to the next. And again, this is the plan of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. A person might question that, Yusuf alayhi salam probably had an idea of how much of grief this would cause, his father. How did he still go on and carry out his plan? How is it possible that he let this happen? And again, the answer is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had decreed it such that Yaqub alayhi salam, his father, would be tested in this way. This was the test of Yaqub alayhi salam. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through his infinite wisdom, chose to chose to test Yaqub alayhi salam in this way. So another question that arises here is in verse number 83, when he says قَالَ بَلْ سَوَّلَتْ لَكُمْ أَنفُسُكُمْ أَمْرًا, that when the brothers come back and they narrate to Yaqub alayhi salam that their brother had stolen and therefore he had been detained as a result of that, Yaqub alayhi salam didn't believe them, although they were speaking the truth. So the answer to this is that it is possible that when a mujtahid, when a person making ijtihad, when a person, especially a person who is a prophet of Allah, even then it is possible that they can err in their judgment. A person can make mistakes. A person can say something that is not right, that is not correct. But in the case of a prophet of Allah, Sayyidina Yaqub alayhi salam, here in this case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not allow this statement of his to stick. And in a short while we see that the statement of the brothers of Yusuf, it becomes apparent that they were actually speaking the truth for the second time. So this is one version of this. The other version of this is that by them saying that Binyamin had stolen and therefore he had been detained because of his stealing, Yaqub alayhi salam, being a prophet of Allah, got the indication that this was actually not the case. And we know this to be true, that Binyamin hadn't actually stolen, but rather this was an elaborate plan of Yusuf alayhi salam to keep his brother back with him. So Yaqub alayhi salam understood the different signs that were within this incident, and he understood that there was some sort of other plan, in the works, and this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So by them accusing their brother of stealing, this is the statement that he makes, that rather قَالَ بَلْ سَوَّلَتْ لَكُمْ أَنفُسُكُمْ أَمْرًا, that this is something that your inner desires have pushed you and seduced you to say this, that your brother has stolen, right? Because although they had, according to the knowledge that they had correctly assumed that Binyamin had stolen. But on the other hand, they had also falsely accused Yusuf alayhi salam of stealing. In both cases, the sons of Yaqub alayhi salam did not steal, and therefore Yaqub alayhi salam is chastising them by saying, قَالَ بَلْ سَوَّلَتْ لَكُمْ أَنفُسُكُمْ أَمْرًا. In both cases, you people are making it up that my sons have stolen. فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ. And although you are accusing my two sons of stealing, falsely accusing them, I will have patience on this. The best thing for me to do at this point is to have patience. فَصَبْرٌ جَمِيلٌ عَسَى اللَّهُ أَن يَأْتِيَنِي بِهِمْ جَمِيعًا. Very soon I have hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He's going to resolve all of this, and He's going to bring all of my sons back to me. And this is because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Al-Alim and He is Al-Hakim. So this is one of the things that we learn from this. Another thing is that when it came to the Yehuda telling his brothers with regards to the plan that this is the way that they should approach and address their father, we see that in this case, when Yehuda makes the statement and he says that وَمَا كُنَّا لِلْغَيْبِ حَافِظِينَ, that go and tell our father that his son has stolen. فَقُولُوا يَا أَبَانَا إِنَّ ابْنَكَ سَرَقَ وَمَا شَهِدْنَا إِلَّا بِمَا عَلِمْنَا وَمَا كُنَّا لِلْغَيْبِ حَافِظِينَ. That we can only present what we know. So ulama and scholars say that whenever there is judgment to be made, this judgment is or this testimony is supposed to be based on proper knowledge, right? It's supposed to be based on what is apparently known in front of the people. You can't falsely give testimony, but at the same time, the testimony has to be within the realm of what is known. If there is some sort of other reality that is not known, then that is above and beyond a person's control, and they will not be held accountable for it. For example, if a person, gave a testimony about a certain thing, and from their perspective, this is what happened, but they didn't have the perspective or the entire picture in front of them, their testimony will still be accepted to say that whatever they had given testimony regarding, this is something that they spoke the truth about. But is the truth the entire, the entire picture or not? That's a different, circumstance altogether. So, for example, if there is a marital dispute, right? From the marital dispute, from this perspective, one person may accuse the other person of doing something. The wife may accuse the husband of doing something, and she may have complaints about him. But at the same time, although from her perspective, her testimony is correct, the judge always has to take the responsibility and to hear the other side out, right? This actually happened in the time of the Prophet ﷺ, that a sahabiya, a lady came and she complained about her husband. She had 3 or 4 different complaints about him, with regards to, for example, delaying salah, with regards to oversleeping Fajr, not being able to pray Fajr, and there was a couple of other complaints. And all of these things were serious complaints by nature. But Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in his own wisdom, in his own way of doing things, summoned the husband and he asked him to explain himself. And when he did explain himself, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam on every accusation forgave and gave advice on what to do regarding the flaws of that, the apparent flaws of that husband. So this is something that we need to understand, and we need to know that sometimes when passing judgment, sometimes when passing testimony, we have to be very, very careful on the way that we speak, on the way that we narrate things, because this can actually result in the destruction of someone's honor or someone's property or someone's life. Whatever the case is, sometimes it can also lead to like broken relationships and broken, households. So this is something that we should all be aware of, that we give testimony according to what we know to be truth, but there should always be this idea that we may not have the entire picture, but at the same time, we will, say according to the knowledge that we have. There's another ruling that is also deduced from the same verse, and Imam Qurtubi relates this. He says that the testimony that a person gives, it depends on knowledge, right? So no matter how this knowledge is acquired, the testimony can be given in accordance to this knowledge. So even if someone didn't see something with their own eyes, right, but they heard it from someone that was completely reliable and someone that was trustworthy, then in this case, the person can give testimony as long as they make it clear that they themselves did not see it with their eyes, but rather they heard it from someone else that was trustworthy. As long as a person does this, then they are allowed to give testimony. And this is why in the Maliki madhab, we find that the scholars, they say that blind people, right, as long as they're upright, as long as they are fully, in control of their other faculties, if they hear of certain news from people that are reliable, and then they choose to give testimony, then their testimony is something that is accepted in the Sharia. So this is something that I just wanted to highlight out of this ayah. And another lesson that we take from this is also that, when there is, when there's a case that a person is speaking the truth, right? But at the same time, because of some sort of past precedent, some sort of past, situation that occurred with the person, there is some sort of doubt, right? So maybe the person is speaking the truth this time, but previously they were caught speaking a lie before. Then to present something that would clear the air, something that would strengthen their testimony, this is something that is required from that person, right? In order to dispel any sort of suspicion that other people would have against them. So in this case, in the case of the brothers of Yusuf alayhi salam, uh, Yehuda knew that his father would be less likely to believe them because of what happened with Yusuf alayhi salam prior. And that is why we see that he says that وَاسْأَلِ الْقَرْيَةَ الَّتِي كُنَّا فِيهَا وَالْعِيرَ الَّتِي أَقْبَلْنَا فِيهَا وَإِنَّا لَصَادِقُونَ. Right? What we are telling you, if you don't believe it, if you don't believe us, then ask the people, ask the people of the city, ask the people of the caravan, right? So this is something that he did in order to solidify the statement that he was making. And as believers, sometimes, if there is a certain situation like this, we also have to, we also have to clarify and clear the air. Even in the case of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam's own life himself, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, on the way back from the masjid, once he was going through an alley, and with him was his wife, al-Mu'mineen Sayyidatuna Safiya radiyallahu ta'ala anha. And she was covered, but Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam was with her in this alley, and he was going back home, and two of his companions, they happened to enter into this alley. So they were at the mouth of this alley, at a distance, from Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and as soon as they saw him, they turned the other way and they started, going back. So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam called them, and he said that innaha Safiya, that this woman that is with me, she is Safiya, she is my wife. So the Sahaba, the two Sahaba, they remarked and they said, Ya Rasulullah, how can we ever suspect you? Right? How can we ever be suspicious about you? So Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the shaitan keeps seeping through the human body. Right? The shaitan travels through a human body, and sometimes it may be possible that shaitan can drop doubts within a person's heart regarding something that they have seen, right? So even if it is Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, in this case, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did not want that there should be some sort of doubt or some sort of suspicion, but rather he did his due diligence and he cleared the air for them, even though they had not suspected him. But in doing so, Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam also teaches us, his ummah, on how to handle such matters. That if we are in perhaps apparently so-called compromising positions, right? It may be that the perception is different. It may be that in public we are somewhere and we are doing something, or we are with someone, and especially being in positions of leadership, or being in positions where people are respected in the community, and things like that. If there is some sort of doubt that may occur from that incident, for example, the person is at a function, or the person, or the person is at a marriage, or the person is somewhere else, and what happens is that there's something wrong going on over there, or maybe that the person was photographed, for example, in a certain position or the other, and there's some sort of now doubt regarding the person's character, or doubt regarding the person's integrity, then it is the duty and responsibility of that person to clear the air, to say that this is not the reality of the matter, this is what happened, although it may seem like it was different, but this is in actuality what the reality was. So it's the responsibility of every believer that they need to clarify and clear the air, especially with regards to their honor. And this is what the Sharia teaches us. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give me first and all of us the tawfiq and the ability that we're able to practice, and we're able to bring into our lives whatever we have learned and pass it on to others. Inshallah, there will be no Sirah halaqah tomorrow night, but the Tafsir halaqah will resume next week, inshallah, and we will continue with the Tafsir of Surah Yusuf. And we will see that, inshallah, we are coming now towards the conclusion and towards the wrapping up of this entire marvelous, series of events that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about in Surah Yusuf itself. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless each and every one of you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.